Right, hello everyone. In this video I'll be showing you how to install a new head gasket. In my case I'll be doing two head gaskets because I'm special on your K11 Nissan Micra. And I'll also try to explain how I took the head off because I actually didn't record any of the removal process, but I'll walk you through how to take it off and then how to put a new head gasket back on. So, now ignore the fact that I'm trying to bolt a turbo onto my engine. It doesn't matter if you have a turbo or not, you probably don't. The first step on removing the head would probably be to remove the exhaust manifold, and you could leave the intake manifold on. It doesn't really change that much, but just make sure to disconnect all of these vacuum hose and obviously the airbox. As you can see, my one is out anyway. I would like to take the time and advise you to leave the intake manifold on when you take off the head and put it back on before you put the head back on. It's really hard to put the intake manifold on the head once it's back on the engine, because there's two bolts that you simply just can't reach very easily unless you get under the car. So don't bother taking it off when you take the head off, and definitely put it on the head before you reinstall the head. And then you're going to undo all of these bolts. You're going to want to remove your cam cover, and you should find your cams here. If you don't find your cams, you definitely have a problem. I took my cams out, as you can see. You're going to want to remove your cam cover, and then you will want to remove the sprockets for the camshafts, which will be on the intake and the exhaust. Make sure to mark which one is which. You don't want to be messing them up, putting them back in. Yeah, so what I was referring to there were these two bolts right here holding on the idlers to the camshaft, the sprockets, whatever you want to call them. So they are, as far as I'm aware, a 22mm socket, and you want to be holding on to the actual camshaft with a 21mm either adjustable wrench or normal wrench. Hold onto the camshaft and break the bolt for the sprocket loose. And of course, I think it goes without saying, make sure to mark where the chain actually meets the sprocket, because you can't really misplace the sprocket on the camshaft because there's a certain slot that needs to go in. But make sure to note the intake and the exhaust sprockets, and same with the intake and exhaust camshaft. Make sure to leave marks like I did on mine. You're also going to want to go remove all of these, including the camshaft sensor, I think, or whatever it is there. Anyway, they're all just 10mm. You might have to jack up the engine and take off this engine mount temporarily while you take that cover off. And then you're going to want to undo this little gear there. There's a bolt, I think it's a 14 or a 16. Take that out. It should just slip out, and remove your timing chain. Of course, like, mark where you put everything so you don't mess it up when you put it back in. Once you've disconnected your timing chain, you're going to want to go and, in like 2 or 3 steps, slowly loosen all of these a bit by bit so you don't like mess anything up, and then the camshaft should just like pull right out. This will take any tension off the valves, and then you will be able to take the head out. So here I've attached a picture of one of the pages out of the K11 Micra's service manual, and this is specifically the head removal page. And here you can see the order in which you should loosen each bolt for the camshaft brackets. That's what they're called, by the way. So you can see there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 12, I think. So yeah. Now also note that it does say to loosen the bolts in 2 or 3 steps. So loosen them a bit, move on to the next one, and then loosen them even more, and then the last time fully take them out. You don't want to be leaving pressure on one side of the camshaft and the other one is there's no pressure on it. And make sure you put the parts that you took out in exactly the same place where they came out of. I highly recommend that you have a look at this service manual. It is in engine mechanical, in this big folder of literally everything to do with the K11 Micra. It is linked in the description. It's free to view. I'll share the link with you guys on Google Drive, so make sure to go and check it out. And literally everything, wiring diagrams, engine, suspension, everything you need to work on a K11 Micra. So let's get back to the video. I'm sure I'm going to have to make more voiceovers because I did not explain a lot of things well. So once you've done all of that, of course, you should have your exhaust manifold off. You can go ahead and slowly start removing each of those head bolts in the pattern that I'm going to put up on the screen now from the K11 maintenance manual, or whatever it's called. And there's also going to be a bolt there, and then another one right there. And you will see them in the picture, so do it in the order that it specifies. Don't worry, I didn't forget to put the picture up. Here it is. This is the order in which you should undo all of the head bolts. Now the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first 5 bolts are some 10mm that are actually on the outside of the head. Well, actually 3 of them are, and 2 of them are behind the little panel that you removed previously. Now once you take those 5 out, you can start removing the actual big head bolts, which are labeled from 6 to 15 here, so do them in that order. And also note once again that they should be loosened in 2 or 3 steps as it says here, and that if you do it in the incorrect order you might mess something up, which you don't want to do. And then assuming that you've disconnected any wires that go to the engine head, you should be able to pull it right out. So obviously once we have the head off, we're going to go ahead and remove the old head gasket. This should just, there we go. Now with the old head gasket out, I'm going to get one of these yokes, pretty much just a blade, and carefully remove any of the dirt that the old gasket left. Now be very careful, you don't want to like scratch it. So let's go. So yes, as I said, be very careful with this. You don't want to leave any big deep scratches where like coolant or oil might leak out. After all, this is literally where the head gasket will go, so be very, very careful doing this. We're now going to spray some brake cleaner on this cloth. Okay, that's enough sound. Right, and we're now going to wipe the surface just to make sure it's nice and clean, and we're also going to wipe in here to make sure, because there is a bit of dirt that got in there and you don't really want that when you are firing up the engine. So the block is now way cleaner. It's not perfect, but it is much cleaner. So now we are ready to put on the head gasket, or head gaskets in my case. Right. Lovely. Fresh. I'll do the voiceover for this part. So as I just said, I am indeed doing the voiceover for this part. Here you can see us cleaning the base of the head, which we did get skimmed. So also, if you're replacing a head gasket, do get it skimmed. There are cases in which you don't really need to do it, but it is best practice to do so. There were a few metal shavings and a few other dirt that gathered up on the bottom of the head, so I just made sure to give it a quick wipe, make sure there's nothing there when we fire up the engine, make sure it's all nice and clean. So we're wiping it down using a bit of brake cleaner everywhere where it's been skimmed to make sure there's nothing else there. And then it came time to put the head back in, so being very careful, we placed it back on top. I think that is it. And now that we have the head successfully back on with the 2 head gaskets on, we are ready to remove the cam cover. Well, get it out of the way, you know what I mean. And we are ready to put the head bolts back in. Now, you're not really supposed to put your old head bolts back in, but you can get away with it. Don't take my word for it. Do this at your own risk. I'm going to put them back in because honestly, I'm not really bothered to get new ones. I know it's not the best idea, but I'm doing this on a budget, and this is the first time the car has had its head gasket replaced. So maybe don't do this, but I'm going to do it. So don't do what I'm doing, but you know. For anyone wondering, I have at least marked the intake and exhaust side of the engine, and I'll be putting the bolts exactly back in where they came from. So first of all, before looking at any torque specs, we just put them all finger tight with the washers also in. And then we went ahead and torqued them all to 39 Newton meters in this specific order, which I will pop up now. So here it is. Fresh. Now, the next step, as you can see here, was to tighten all the bolts to 78 Newton meters. However, we had a slight problem. Yeah, I hope 60 and a bit more turns will have to do. Fresh. Now that we've torqued them down to over 60 Newton meters, we're going to go ahead and completely loosen them in the reverse order. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 and 1. Let's go ahead and do that. With all of those loose, once again, we're going to tighten them to 35 Newton meters in the 1 to 10 order. With all of those torqued down to 35 Newton meters, we're going to go ahead and, as it says right here, screw them in a further 60 degrees. You should have a little tool to do this, but we're just going to eyeball it because I'm working on a Micra in my driveway. That looks like 60 degrees to me. That was it. So now that we have all of that done and they're all torqued to spec, somewhat, we are going to tighten bolts 11 to 15, as we see here, to anywhere between 6.3 to 8.3 newton meters, which is barely anything. So those bolts are the following: 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. So if we look at the head here, we have 11 there, 12 right there, 14 and 15, those two right there. I mean, no, 13 and 14, my bad, and 15 right there. So that's it. That's it. So with all of those bolts in, we are practically finished with bolting the head back down. So we had to move on and put the camshafts back in. All right, anyway, well, we've skipped ahead just a bit. We have removed all of these camshaft holders and we've put the camshafts back in. I would like to take the time and mention that when you put the camshafts back in, it is advised that you lubricate them with some oil for the car's first startup after you put the engine back together. Now, I didn't actually do that because, as I will also say later in the video, I don't want to put any oil in the engine yet because I am waiting to drill a hole in my oil sump for the turbo oil return. So that's why I didn't lubricate the camshafts when I put them back in, but I will definitely do it when I want to start up the car. So I'm just going to take the cam cover back off, make sure it's all well lubricated before I start the car. But definitely do lubricate your camshafts when you put them back in. Now, we do need to put the sprockets, the intake and exhaust sprockets in and tighten them just like that. And then we will feed the chain over while we're tightening the sprockets. So let me show you how we're going to do that. We're now mocking up the sprockets for the camshaft, the exhaust on here, and we've marked we're putting the marks back in to make sure we're not messing anything up. And then we're going to do the same one with the intake sprocket. Give us that. There we go. And then we're going to put that bolt down in there back in. We have secured the exhaust camshaft bolt and sprocket. We've put all of that together, all marked up. We are now going to tighten for these until the camshaft pushes down, so we have a bit more slack in the chain, so we can actually do the other sprocket. So essentially what we did there, we followed these instructions right here for putting the camshafts back in, because what we wanted to do was really clamp the camshafts back in the right position, because we saw where the marks met the sprockets and where the sprockets met the camshaft. So we put them up in roughly the right position and then clamped them down with the brackets. By clamping the camshafts down, what we essentially did was brought them lower, and therefore we could actually fit the chain around them, because otherwise they would have been too high up and there simply wasn't enough slack in the timing chain to get them around, especially how we put a second head gasket in. Despite it just being 1.2 millimeters thicker, it was a little harder to get it in, but it definitely was possible. Once we got them in, we didn't actually put the tensioner in yet. The tensioner was the last thing to go in. Once we got all the camshafts back in place, clamped down with the timing chain in the right position, we were able to fit the bolt for the idler sprocket, I think it's called. I'll pop up a picture now. We were able to line that up correctly and finally put that in, which was a 17 millimeter. So after playing around a bit with the positioning of the camshafts and putting all the bolts for the sprockets in first, we finally managed to pretty much just position that in the right place for the bolt to go in. It was a bit tricky to get it, so sorry we didn't get any content of it, but it was quite stressful trying to get it in. But it definitely is possible, even with 2 head gaskets. If it's possible with 2 head gaskets, you should have no problem doing it with 1 head gasket. Well, I assume you would have expected me to do everything correctly after I've said all of that with such confidence, but let me just show you a quick video of what I found the next day. So I'm working here on the timing chain, trying to put everything back together, and I look here and something seems a bit off. I look under there, then I look back up here. That could have been really bad. So yeah, that was the washer for the 17 millimeter bolts that held in the idler sprocket, whatever it's called. And that had been sitting there since the end of August when I actually took the head of the car off. I've actually had the head off for a really long time. But that washer stayed there for like a solid 3 months and I did not notice anything. Good thing I noticed something, because if I didn't, it would have been really, really bad. So when you're taking the head off, make sure not to lose that washer. Make sure it doesn't fall into the timing chain. Be very, very careful, please. We are now putting the tension here to make slack in the chain down there, so the tensioner, which is right here, there you go, can go back in. After playing around with the positioning of the tensioner, we finally got it to go into the holes it is supposed to. So the 210mm went right into the hose and the tensioner is back on. Everything is lined up and the engine is pretty much ready to crank over. But we need to put everything back on. And now that we have finally successfully put everything back in, we're just going to go and make sure that everything is torqued down to spec. Starting with the camshaft brackets, whatever they are called. Yes, camshaft brackets. Here we have the torque specs. You'll not be able to see that. I'll put a picture of this up anyway. So we're going to end off by torquing down to 11.8 Newton meters. So as we are now running out of light, I've also found the picture that shows all the torque specs, and I'll put it up on screen right now. So the bottom one says anything between 43 and 58 Newton meters. So we'll probably go for 52, somewhere around the middle. So we torqued everything down to spec like a few nights ago, including the camshaft bolts for the sprockets, which were like 94 or 128.7 Newton meters, which was a lot. But yeah, this is where we're at now. Ignored the teeth and the tongue. It was Halloween last night, but yeah, so that was it. We took the old head gasket out, put the new 2 head gaskets back in, torqued everything back down to spec somewhat, and put everything back. Now it's not as if my engine's ready to crank over because there's no oil, no coolant, no nothing in it, and the ECU doesn't want to let it start. I'm still working on it, but yeah, definitely put some oil over the camshafts and the timing chain once you reassemble it. I probably mentioned it so far, but definitely do that. I didn't do it because I want to drill my oil sump for the turbo oil return. So yeah, definitely do put oil. I just didn't put oil. I'll open mine back up when it is time to start, and I'll make sure to lubricate all the moving bits inside the engine. But that's it for now. I hope you found this helpful. If you do have any more questions, since I'm sure I skipped a few steps, so if you need any help, make sure to DM me on Instagram or leave a comment down below, and I'll try my best to help you guys out. And that's pretty much it for now. Make sure to follow the Instagram and the TikTok, and I shall see you in the next one, and buy the merch.